Good evening, everyone. Calling the January 30th Policy Committee meeting to order. Zachary Epps, the co-chair, and we'll start with roll call. I'll start with our incoming co-chair to my right.
Jennifer Lohman here.
Robin Murphy here.
And then we'll just recognize, we'll recognize the board members who are in attendance tonight. Virtually, we have Mia Blitzstein.
Yeah.
We have other, I can't see everyone. Is anyone else here yet? Or okay, we may have some join, and then in person we have more. All right, that's our roll call. We'll move forward for approval of the minutes from October 24th, 2023.
So moved.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, the minutes are approved, and we'll move forward for our old business. I'll hand it over to administration.
Okay. You want to start?
Sure.
Let's start with policy 109. School library philosophy policy. This will go up for adoption. We met and discussed this during our last meeting, which was October 24th. And since then, for November and December and January, these policies were included on our board agenda. The 109.
And I think we've had a lot of discussion about this one. No changes since the last meeting, though.
All right, open it up to comments from the board. Comments from the public. The public. Is there anyone online? So we need to be mindful.
No.
All right, that is, as mentioned, 109 will move forward for adoption or for consideration for adoption at our next meeting. And move forward to 218.
We could probably take items 4, 5, and 6 together. They're all the weapons-related policies that we sort of have looked at as a group. Those two, same setup here. They'd be moving to adoption for the February 13th meeting. No changes to any of these policies since the first reading. And again, we've had quite a bit of discussion at the last two meetings about the weapons policies.
It's true. Opening up to board for comments.
Sorry. I just had a question about 356. I'm looking at it in draft. I don't have there's one change. The quotation mark was removed.
Yeah, I don't think we made changes to this one, substantive changes.
Okay.
I think the cross-reference was added. There was one little minor, as you noted, the quotation mark was removed, but this policy was okay. It didn't require revision when we looked at it.
Okay, thank you. I just want to make sure I wasn't missing.
Nope, you're right.
Wait, is this 218?
218.2, 904, and 356.
Okay. So 218.2 was also a name change. Because it was weapons and other
Correct.
dangerous items.
Yep.
And there was a question, but it actually relates to, I guess, what we'll consider in our new business around transfer students, the history of bringing weapons to schools.
Sure.
We didn't have a community question about that, but that's
Okay.
Yeah, I don't track anything else. All right, so we'll move forward. Any comments from the public on 218, 356, or 904? And you have an exhibit with you there?
You see them?
It's just these four right now.
Okay.
All right, we'll move that one forward for consideration, all three of those forward for adoption at the next February meeting. We'll move forward to 918.
Yep, 918 is the Title I policy. No changes since the last meeting. This would be moving forward to final adoption in February.
Opening up for comments from the board. As well.
You can tell, I think the policy is great, it's good, it's, you know, I like the language in it, there's lots of, requirements for family engagement, that the district must undertake for its Title I program schools. I just hope that our implementation of this captures the spirit of the policy. I'm just not sure how much. I should just back up and say, when I first came into the district, there were meetings, family engagement meetings, every so often around Title I. Now that may have just been a fluke. We might have been a Title I district at that point. I'm not sure. But I'm just hoping that, all of these various engagement efforts that are listed in this policy are going to be moving forward. Thank you.
And to administration credit, we did receive an education committee meeting, which doesn't get to the level of engagement here, so definitely warranted compliance versus engagement, but certainly recognize some of the moments that we've seen. Mrs. Murphy, was it? Oh, no, okay, cool. We'll move forward, open it up to comments from members of the public.
No comment.
All right, that'll move forward as well for consideration for adoption at the February legislative meeting. I think this is our last old business for today. Oh, Dr. Scrivens.
So one thing that I would say to, in response to Ms. Loman, if there's any updates or anything that you would want around what is currently happening or happening in the near future, shoot a request to Pam Henry, and we can definitely include that as part of a board update, just to let you know kind of where things stand from that perspective.
Great, thank you, Dr. Scrivens.
Last piece of business for old business is up next. 247.
Yes, so 247 is the bullying and harassment policy. State code requires this one to be looked at every 3 years, and it gets submitted to PDE. So we're here for the 3-year review. Not many changes to the policy, just a couple non-substantive cosmetic changes. In the administrative regulation, we did update the assistant athletic director. It's the director of athletics and activities, but at the time when this was last revised, SUNY Blackwell was in that position. We updated that to reflect Mr. Fleury's filling of that role currently. I think that was the only change to the regulation. Yes. So.
Opening up comments from the board.
I assume that the names and the address or the emails are there because that's what the state requires or PD requires. Normally, we wouldn't have contact information in a policy.
Yeah, so we have to, the requirements are that we have to prominently indicate who the coordinators are. And so it goes in this policy, it goes in the Title IX documents and the forms that go out. But yeah, we try to keep an eye on this as that position periodically changes. We'll make sure that we update it.
Thank you.
Any comments to our community members? All right, that will move forward for adoption at our February meeting, and we can move to new business.
So for new business tonight, we have 3 policies in the 600 series, which are simply up for routine review. When you sort our policy manual and you look at the oldest policies in terms of last review date, 608, 615, and 617 are towards the top of that list. So they're all pretty simple policies in the 600 series. In one of the remaining meetings this year, Mr. Swigert will be here to talk about some of the more complicated 600 series policies where there might be some additional revisions. But given the limited nature of the revisions to 608, 615, and 617, I thought that I could address any questions this evening. So we'll start with 608. 608 is the policy on bank accounts, which simply tracks the state's school code requirement that periodically the board designate school depositories.
Did you want to do all those 3 together, or you?
We don't have to.
Oh,
I
okay,
mean, they're all
just-
separate. We can
okay,
start
cool.
with 608.
All right, opening up
Yep.
for comments from the board on 608. Yeah, I'm a fan of making things explicit, so being explicit around the board's responsibility and the delegation of responsibility, that's certainly helpful in all areas, so appreciate that. Opening up comments for 608 to members of the public. You can move forward. That'll move for a first read at our February meeting.
Same thing with payroll deductions here. Essentially, the district deducts from payroll those deductions that are required by law for taxes, and employees can designate additional deductions if they so choose by submitting a form with the business office.
Bringing up comments on 615 for the board. Members of the public. Mentioned that one's pretty straightforward. That will go forward for first read, 615, and we'll go to 617.
Yep, 617 is the petty cash policy. Petty cash fund exists here in the central office. Not many changes, nothing really substantive to the policy or the regulations for that matter. But there are procedures in place that require receipts to be submitted. There's some language about expenses that are appropriate for petty cash, not appropriate for petty cash, and deadlines for making sure that account is periodically replenished at the end of the fiscal year.
I actually did have a question about 608 about
Okay.
this.
Oh, 608?
Yeah, bank accounts.
Okay.
But I'll pause on that. I will open it up to members of the board for petty cash.
Okay, we can go back. Yeah, this is-
Any comments on 617 from? That'll move forward for first read.
Okay,
And if we could, and it may be a very
sure.
basic, but it's just the way I was reading it. There was a sentence about checks that are deposited that can't be cashed to the district or something.
Yeah, so whenever you get, the district periodically receives checks. And one of the safeguards is you really don't want any employee ever taking checks to the bank and cashing them. Those are checks for deposit.
Got it.
So an instruction that the banks generally have is these checks are for deposit. And if an employee walks in and tries to cash a check, you can't do that.
Okay.
And so that's the, it's just
It's a
a
good
See
safeguard.
what?
Yeah, okay. All right, so we can move forward to 206.
Okay. So this is a new policy that came out as a recommendation from PSBA, actually in light of some new guidance from PDE that came out. And really what the language talks about in part is that when students are being received by the district from the criminal juvenile system, that there's certain information that gets shared with the district about the nature of their prior delinquent acts and guidance on what information can be shared internally to ensure, essentially to ensure a safe school environment. So the first part of this language talks about that information that the district receives and how it can be utilized internally. Essentially states that staff in the building that are going to be receiving that student have access to some of the information that they need about the prior adjudication to ensure that they can properly program, supervise the student, and ensure the safety of the building. And then there are, if we scroll down, this language is not new to the school code, but given that we've got now a policy on discipline records, we're putting this language in this policy. This sworn affidavit that gets signed when you enroll your children in the district, you always have to sign an affidavit about whether your child has been expelled from another school for certain offenses, alcohol, weapons, drugs, and so that requirement is built in here. And then the final piece of this is just some basic rules. These rules are also not new about what discipline records transfer from district to district when a student transfers from one school to another or from one district to another. None of that language is new either, but it seemed to make sense to all go in this one policy on discipline records. I think you mentioned there might have been a question about the middle part of this.
Yeah, from a previous community.
Sure.
member who's may or may not be to this, right? But it was like, what can be done to address transfers of students with history of bringing weapons to school? How to be more explicit about guns. So it seems like to an extent it does because the school would know. Well, if there's an actual criminal record attached to those actions, the school would be made aware of it.
Correct.
And then could make adjustments to how they serve the student in the environment.
And if a student is expelled for a weapons offense from another school system, the district can maintain that expulsion. You can recognize that expulsion from a prior school. Expulsions aren't generally permanent though. So sometimes they're for a year, sometimes they're for the balance of the year. So it doesn't mean that the district will never have to educate that student in the building. It's just that you can honor the balance of the term on an expulsion for a student that you receive.
Opening it up to comments from the board.
I have a question. Mr. Diazio, was this recommendation from PDE, do you know, was it based on some statutory changes?
Yeah, I can. Might actually help if I pull it up here. So. Don't want to quote the wrong. So let me go back up here. So 218. So the revisions, the recommendations are based on a revision to Rule 163 of Section 237 of the Pennsylvania Code, which relates to release of information to schools. And I can actually click on that. And you can see these are the state regulations.
That was a regulatory change.
Yeah, it's a regulatory change. And so upon finding of a juvenile being delinquent, the information that can go to the school, the name and the address, the delinquent acts, a brief description, the disposition of the case. Section B talks about the notification to the school. That was that first part of the policy. And then I believe if we scroll down here, there's language that talks about what we're essentially able to do with that information. So the information cannot be used for disciplinary decisions unless, and then there's all kinds of criteria,
Right.
but it was a state regulatory
Okay,
change.
I thank you for clarifying
Yep.
that. It felt like it must have been either regulatory or statutory. When it come just out of a basic education circle.
Correct.
Thank you.
I had a similar question.
Okay.
Because I know that certain information is protected as well with juvenile. So I know there was a long list of references, but my assumption is one of them was to our like record keeping and secure records, how long they can be kept and things like that. Is that one of the?
Yeah, that should be, so policy 206 is our records policy. And then this reference here to 1232G, that's a standard reference to FERPA. So that's correct.
Certainly appreciate that it's included in the law that it cannot be used for disciplinary reasons. And it's just, some safeguards for the student.
Correct.
Appreciate that scenario. Seeing no other hands, opening up to comments from members of the public.
I do want to have one question. Do those rules and regulations apply to students that have IEPs and special needs?
Yes, they do, correct. Because this is just a policy about notification and then use of that information internally. So it's not, students aren't being placed because of this information or anything like that. It applies to all students.
All right, thanks for that. That'll move forward for first read consideration at our next meeting. And we can go forward to 816.
So 816 had very minor changes. There was language in the policy around internet filtering that if the school district's filtering system was blocking information that students needed to access for a legitimate educational purpose, there was language in the prior policy that talked about that the administration could authorize disabling that blocking or filtering software to enable the student to access material that may have been blocked by the filter because it was being accessed for a legitimate purpose. An example could be, for example, a student's doing a project on breast cancer and certain information may be blocked and maybe they're engaging in a legitimate supervised activity. The actual language that the policy should have used was adjusting the filter. You're not actually disabling the filter. The filter still stands. You're just disable or you're just adjusting it to temporarily allow the student to access what they need. That was actually the reason that we brought this under review. This was another recommendation from PSBA to look at that disable versus adjustment language. And really that's all, this is a lengthy policy on acceptable use, but this was just a very minor revision. I don't think there was anything else that, other than a couple like minor word changes here and there, nothing else significant about 816. We looked at 816 a little bit over a year ago, and Mr. Barone looked comprehensively at 816 at the time when there were more significant revisions.
All right, opening up to comments from the board. Yeah, I do think it was quite the opposite. We had a good comprehensive conversation about this the last time. It wasn't that far away, or not too long ago. So moving forward to questions or comments from members of the public. Right. 816 will move forward and we'll go forward to 255.
Yeah, so the next policy, 255, this is a new policy titled Educational Opportunity for Military Children. There was a section of the school code that went into effect just recently that requires school districts to do certain things to facilitate the enrollment of active duty military families. And that can include one of the things that it does, and it's the reason why later on the agenda, you'll see that we're looking at policy 202. Yeah, we're looking at policy 202 because one of the things that the law requires is that we be more flexible in terms of our enrollment processes. And when families are moving around because of active duty military, if they don't yet have proofs of residency and things like that, we're required to enroll them. The documentation then follows. And there's a whole list of items that we're to do to support these families. This is not going to be a policy that comes up all the time, every day. But there are certain things that the law requires, they're listed here, enable essentially to facilitate the enrollment and the and stability in the education for military families that traditionally bounce around from time to time.
Thanks. Opening up to comments from the board. Just to make sure Mia doesn't. Can we pull back up? the
Oh,
email
sure.
and capture it?
Yeah, looking to see if I saw any hands up at the bottom.
Oh, yeah, that's where it's. Either way works. Oh.
Oh,
wait a
okay.
minute, I got you this. Mrs. Blitzstein. Oh, she's cutting.
I think she's okay.
Oh,
Yeah,
she's saying
had a
no, she's
question,
okay.
she's-
Okay, gotcha. You're still there. All right, so we'll go. Oh, comments from our community.
So I want you to know, for these students, or active duty students, does it apply, they still have to live in the district, correct, or no?
Yeah, so regarding the enrollment, yes, so you have to provide, the family would provide a copy of their military order, and then in section B, you have to provide one of these documents, which is either a contract to buy a home, a signed lease, or a statement indicating your intent to move. And then within 45 days, you actually have to produce that documentation. The intent of the law is to recognize that because families get moved around, they may be, in the process of establishing residency in the district, or maybe staying somewhere else, until the end of the month, until their lease begins. But there is a requirement that you do have to be living within the district within 45 days is what the law says. And you have to provide that proof of residency. It's just that you get a little bit more time.
Explanation. We will consider that at our next legislative meeting. And we'll go forward to 217.
So for 217, I'm just going to preview. We're actually going to hold policy 217 because I think we want to do a deeper dive on this one in general. So to make sure that the credit numbers are correct, given the last time we looked at it was 2020. But one of the things that policy 255 requires us to do is making sure that we can help students experiencing educational instability, which, recall, those are our foster care students, our homeless students, and now also our students that are active duty military families. We have to support them in coming up with a graduation plan. And so those two broad statements were added to policy 217, but as the administrative team reviewed the agenda and looked at this item, I think we realized we may have some additional revisions to bring back to the committee. And we'll do that in March. So we can hold this one for now, but I just wanted to preview these two changes will remain for next month. So
So
no
we could
formal
just-
action needed.
Yeah,
this
so we
evening.
probably, well, we're here, so is
Yeah.
there anything to discuss? I guess we could discuss those changes, or
Correct.
should we just?
Absolutely. Yeah, sure. It'll make the next meeting
A little,
presumably go faster.
2 minutes faster. Right?
Yeah.
I'll open it up for comments from the board. All right, and there's no comments from board or community. So we'll hold that, no action for our February meeting, and it'll come back to policy. And we'll go forward to, I think our last, no, almost.
Almost.
Piece of new business, 202.
Okay, so for 202, there is language in here. So 202 is the policy that talks about categories of non-resident students who are able to attend the district schools. So one category is those children of active duty military families for that temporary period of time, where they get some flexibility in terms of their move-in date. I restructured, there used to be this list of 4 categories, and instead of making a list, I moved them up and put headings with categories. It just felt a little bit easier to read. So there's no real new language. The support gratis, the non-resident children placed in a residence home, residents of institutions, all of that language was in the prior policy. We did add the category of students that's contemplated by educational instability has grown. Previously, we used to talk about students experiencing homelessness. Now the law treats students that are in foster care and also students who have moved around from system to system for a number of reasons, including homelessness. Now the policy talks about any of those students that meet the criteria for establishing educational instability. They at times have a right to attend school in the district, even though they may not be residing here in this moment. Let me keep going and seeing if there's anything else. Nothing else in the policy changed, and I don't think anything substantively changed in the regulation. We updated some pronouns and we adjusted a language. We adjusted some language in the procedure here when there's an investigation around a non-residency matter. There's generally at least 2 notices that go out to the family. The first notice is just a notice from the district. It's not a formal legal notice. It's the second notice that goes out if there's going to be a hearing where the family gets procedural safeguards notice. That letter has to go certified mail. It has to go a certain number of days in advance of the hearing. This prior administrative regulation sort of suggested that both of those letters would have that same, those would follow the same process, and they're not. The first letter is just an informal communication to the family. Sometimes it's not even a letter. Sometimes it's an email. And so we just updated that to reflect current practice.
Opening up for comments from the board on 202.
I did want to point out that there is language in here because the board had questions before just around residency investigations in general. There is language built into somewhere in here in the policy or the regulation that the enforcement has to be carried out in a non-discriminatory way, not to target certain types of students. And so that was important to the board the last time that we looked at this policy. I can tell you that from an enforcement standpoint, in recent years, the goal has been towards improving our processes so that we don't have individualized investigations nearly as frequently. So some of the things that I know the Student Services Office is doing is, we're doing a better job when families come in and they're registering with a lease. We're doing a better job following up with them at the expiration of their lease to get the successor lease in place. That applies to anybody that's enrolling on a lease. We follow up with homeless students now at the end of every school year. A general letter goes out that PDE suggests we send, and we ask families for any updates to their living situation. We identify the homeless coordinator and the home and school visitor if the family needs any support. So we do more things from a process standpoint in hopes that that those processes do what they're supposed to do and make sure students are enrolled the right way. And we have seen that the number of investigations and the amount of surveillance that we've had to do has gone down over the years. So I think that was a question that the board has had in previous years, and I just wanted to share with you some of the things that I know the district is doing to try to make sure that no one is feeling targeted by this policy.
Thanks for that. Any comments from the board? Now, you preempted my question already because, I believe in some of the data that was presented was somewhere around 97 or 98% of cases being found like they were residents of Cheltenham. So the fact that again, we talked about it at the last committee meeting, and kind of pointed out there's some standards of procedures being put in place, and we're seeing whether those actually help make a difference in the experience of families and students. So I appreciate that. Comments from community? All right, we'll move forward to 006.
I believe with 006, this was just there's always that long list of actions that require 5 votes versus a majority of the quorum that's present at the meeting. And PSBA does a really good job following changes in the law and trying to make this simpler. And there was just some moving around the section of the policy that talked about 2/3 of those voting in the presence of the quorum based on some changes in the state code. They were able to go in different buckets in terms of the number of votes required. I believe that was the only change to this policy. Yep. That was it.
Opening up for comments from the board. So there are no other scenarios that require supermajority at this point. Well, once this passes, it will all be majority.
So the items that, so this whole list here under 2 requires the affirmative votes of a majority of the full membership. So that's 5 votes, 5 of 9. So that means even if only 7 members are present at a meeting, you still need 5 votes for these items. 4 doesn't do it, even though 4 is a majority of the 7 present. So and there's a long list of things that you need 5 votes to do.
Yeah.
Then there is a shorter list that requires 2/3 of the full membership of the board, which would be at least 6 votes. And there's A through I there, which require 2/3 vote. And then there are 2 items, which I've never seen either of these items ever come to fruition, but they require unanimous. They talk about appointing, I think this has to do with board members who step down to immediately assume a different role with the district in either a legal capacity or a board secretary capacity, and that has to be a unanimous vote. Otherwise, unless it falls within those 3 categories, generally a majority of those present and voting at a meeting would be sufficient for the action to pass.
No, that's helpful. I'm glad I asked, because you actually answered something different.
However, this list under 2, even though, I mean, it is a long list, but it actually talks about most of the things that you do. It talks about hiring, it talks about levying taxes, it talks about appointing teachers and principals and adopting textbooks and changing your calendar. All of those things require 5 votes.
So these, I mean, we generally only vote at legislative meetings.
Correct.
Right? So in terms of tracking to make sure we're doing it correctly, I assume that's what you help us
It's
with mostly.
That's my job.
Okay.
Yeah, I review the agenda in advance.
That's my nice way of
Yes.
confirming this.
Don't rely on us.
Here we are scrambling through our policy manual to make sure we're the right one, but okay. And I think that even though it has to be the majority of the full board, we often have the full board in our, like,
Correct.
so it's often, knock on wood, I don't foresee it being a problem. Thank you.
Comments from the public? Well, that's our last item for the day. That 006 and 202 will move forward first reading at our February meeting. Thanks for members of the public. It's really nights like this where we get to in some months talk about why we're at 75%, 80%, 90% of our policies are reviewed. So maybe a little slow and draggy, but I feel like these are the nights that allow us to stay ready as a
That's
district.
right.
So appreciate the administration's foresight and diligence of policy. With that, we'll get a motion to adjourn.
So moved. Second.
Thanks. Votes, all ayes,
Aye.
and we are adjourned.